Okay, let's dive into a real economic puzzle today. It's a story about one of the world's fastest growing economies, India, and a contradiction that's just fascinating. Let's jump right into the numbers. So, here's the first number that just kind of blows your mind: $4.51 trillion. That's the projected size of India's economy in 2026. It's an absolute powerhouse, and it's growing faster than pretty much any other major economy out there. And with a number that big, it's no surprise that India is now the fourth largest economy on the entire planet. That's huge. But here's where things get weird. You look at a different ranking, the average income per person, what they call per capita income, and suddenly India's rank just plummets from fourth in the world all the way down to 144th. So, what is going on here? How can a country be an economic giant, yet the average person isn't really feeling that wealth? Well, that's the paradox we're going to solve in this explainer. We've got two big clues to uncover. All right, let's get into our first clue. It's got a bit of a technical name, but the idea is actually super simple. It's called the denominator effect. Think about it like this. You're just doing a simple division problem. You take the country's total economic output, its GDP, and you divide it by the number of people. Well, that number of people is the denominator. And when that denominator is, absolutely massive, even a giant economic pie results in a pretty tiny slice for everyone on average. And in India's case, that denominator isn't just big, it's the biggest in the world. We're talking about 1.42 billion people. That's the number you're dividing that $4.5 trillion by. And this comparison with Japan just makes it crystal clear. Check this out. Japan's total economy is actually a little smaller than India's, but their population is just a fraction of India's. So what happens? The average person in Japan ends up with an income that's more than 10 times higher. It's pretty much the same size pie, just way, way fewer people to share it with. But, okay, that huge population explains why the average piece of the pie is small. It's a huge part of the puzzle for sure, but it's not the whole story, because it doesn't tell us how that pie is actually distributed. And that brings us to our second and maybe even more important clue, the Great Divide. Yeah, there's this term that really paints a picture of what's going on, a K-shaped recovery. Just picture the letter K, right? You've got one line shooting straight up and another line slanting down. That's exactly what's happening. Different groups of people are having wildly different economic experiences. Some are soaring, while others are falling behind. And this is where it gets really stark. We're not just talking about a little bit of inequality. The wealth is incredibly concentrated. Get this. The top 10% of the population holds nearly 2/3, 65% of all the wealth in the entire country. So let's dig into the evidence. Let's see exactly who's getting all that wealth and who isn't. Okay, this table really lays it all out. Look at the top 10%. They're taking home almost 60% of all the income each year, and they own 65% of the wealth. Now, look all the way down at the bottom 50%. That's more than 700 million people. They're only getting 15% of the income, and their share of the total wealth? A shocking 3%. Just 3. And if you thought that was crazy, this chart zooms in even further. Look at this. The top 1%, just the very tip of the pyramid, holds over 40% of the nation's wealth. And the entire bottom half of the country, again, hundreds of millions of people, they have just 3%. I mean, that gap is it's breathtaking. So what you end up with is really a tale of three different Indias, all living in the same country. You've got the top 1%, whose wealth is just exploding, growing like crazy. Then you have this squeezed middle 40% who are actually losing ground. Their share of the pie is shrinking. And then there's the bottom 50%. For them, even with all this headline growth for the country, their actual wages have barely moved. They're essentially stuck. And to give you some historical context for just how extreme this is, check this out. The concentration of wealth in India today has now surpassed the levels from the British colonial era. Let that sink in. It's at an all-time historic high. Okay, so let's put it all together. The verdict is in. We have our two clues, this massive population and this extreme inequality, and they perfectly solve our initial paradox. And if you need one last number, just one, to really hammer home the sheer scale of this divide, here you go. The top 0.0001% of the population, that's a tiny, tiny group of people. now owns 3 times more wealth than the entire bottom half of the country combined. 3 times. So there's the solution to the puzzle, right there in 2 steps. First, you have this enormous $4.5 trillion economy, but you have to slice it up for the world's largest population, which makes the average piece small. And then, and this is the real kicker, that wealth doesn't get shared out. It gets funneled, concentrated, right at the very top, into the hands of a tiny few. And that leaves us with one final, really important question to think about. There's no doubt India's economy is going to keep growing. It's a powerhouse. But when you see numbers like these, you can't help but ask, as the economy gets bigger, who is it really growing for?